In every unexplained death, there comes a moment where a line is drawn under the mystery. A moment where a coroner delivers their findings, a cause of death is recorded, and, in theory, the case is closed. But what happens when that conclusion leaves too many unanswered questions? When vital evidence is left unexamined, and when the story we're being told doesn't seem to match the facts we've already seen? That's where we are with the case of Jay Slater. On the surface, the official narrative is straightforward. Jay was partying hard, made some poor decisions, wandered off into a remote ravine, and fell to his death. Tragic, but accidental. No foul play, no mystery. But when you dig a little deeper, the cracks begin to show. In this episode, we'll examine what the inquest actually concluded, and what it failed to investigate. We'll look at the post-mortem results, the digital data, the coroner's closing remarks, and the forensic details that were either glossed over or completely ignored. We'll ask how someone could remain undiscovered for nearly a month in a location that had supposedly already been searched. We'll question how a body could end up severely mummified in a humid, open-air environment. And we'll consider whether the evidence of third-party involvement was dismissed far too quickly. On the final day of the inquest, the room fell quiet as the coroner delivered his closing statement, the official verdict in the death of Jay Slater. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. But for many, what they heard didn't bring clarity. It brought confusion, and a deeper sense that something important had been left out. Jay was formally identified through fingerprint and palm print comparison. His body had been lying in the Juan Lopez ravine for nearly a month before it was found, and, according to the post-mortem, it had undergone what the pathologist described as extensive mummification, a rare condition, one that sparked more questions than answers. The cause of death, said Dr. Mark Shepard, was a severe traumatic brain injury, most likely caused by a fall of 20 to 30 meters. He told the court Jay's death was probably instantaneous, and added, in what seemed an attempt at comfort, I hope it is some consolation to the family that Jay would have been unaware of the situation after his fall. But for a case with so many strange turns, the summary that followed felt more like a dismissal than a deep dive. Toxicology results showed that Jay had taken drugs and alcohol before his death. Spanish authorities later confirmed the presence of other substances, both shortly before and over a longer period. Rather than explore how this may have impacted his vulnerability or potential victimhood, the coroner used the findings to build a narrative of intoxicated recklessness. He even referenced a night when Jay and Bradley were so drunk they couldn't get out of their clothes, calling it a sign of the extent of the partying that occurred. He said a common theme across the testimony was that Jay's friends had consumed copious amounts of drugs and alcohol. The implication was clear. They were unreliable, and Jay was out of his mind. But is that really the full picture? The coroner described how Jay had been thrown out of a nightclub for being unable to stand, and how, despite his friends pleading with him to return, he insisted on staying out. He then asked Ayub Qasim if he could come with him and Stephen Roccas to a remote Airbnb in the mountains. Qasim told him it was some distance away, but agreed to take him back in the morning. In the early hours of the morning, Jay sent a Snapchat to Brad, showing himself in the Masca area. According to Ayub, they stopped to get soft drinks. This is where the coroner moved to address the now infamous watch claims. He referred to the various Snapchats where Jay bragged about stealing a luxury watch, but downplayed them entirely. The brands mentioned were inconsistent, he said, and Ayub suggested it was likely just social media boosting. The coroner agreed, concluding, I consider that the watch is irrelevant to subsequent events. Then came the knife image. Another Snapchat reportedly showing Jay lifting his shirt to reveal knives tucked into his trousers, with the caption, in case it kicks off. This was sent to Josh Forshaw. But Forshaw, who received the message, never told Jay's friends. He didn't even ask Jay about it. Again, the coroner dismissed it. He said, "I do not consider that this report with the image of knives is reliable evidence and is more likely to be social media boosting." 2 red flags waved away. Jay reportedly told Kasim he was heading back on his own and mentioned a bus leaving in 10 minutes. Kasim insisted there were no buses. Jay claimed a local woman had told him otherwise. Ayub said Jay still appeared to be under the influence and was acting confident and impulsive. Jay's body was found 29 days later by mountain rescue in the Juan Lopez Ravine, a remote, steep, and difficult location. He was found meters above a dry riverbed. His bag, containing his phone and passport, was found 20 meters further uphill. He is believed to have fallen between 20 and 30 meters. The terrain, rescuers said, was treacherous, a place people don't normally go due to the lack of water and danger. The coroner said Jay's lack of survival training, poor clothing, drug use, and dehydration seriously compromised his ability to react to a fall. The conclusion was blunt and final. J. Dean Slater died on the 17th of June 2024 in the Juan Lopez Ravine, in a remote area of Tenerife. Whilst attempting to descend the ravine, Jay fell in a difficult area. Jay Slater fell approximately 20 to 25 meters, resulting in skull fracture and brain trauma from which he would have died instantly. There was no third-party involvement. J. Dean Slater died an accidental death. But for many, that statement didn't feel like a conclusion. It felt like a convenient closure. Because while the coroner dismissed knives, watches, and phone calls as exaggeration or bravado, he did not address the physical plausibility of where Jay's body was found. He did not explain how his bag could have ended up above him. He offered no exploration of the extent of mummification, and he failed to ask what role, if any, a third party may have played. Most notably, 2 key people did not testify in person at the inquest. That was Brandon Hodgson and Stephen Roccas. Their absence wasn't just curious, it was damaging. Because if the goal of the inquest was to uncover the truth, how can it be trusted when critical voices were missing? In any death investigation, the presence or absence of key witnesses can shift the entire outcome. Sometimes, the loudest clues come not from those who testify, but from those who choose not to. In Jay Slater's case, 2 crucial figures never entered the courtroom. 2 people with intimate knowledge of Jay's final movements either refused to speak or simply vanished from view. Their silence wasn't just unsettling, it was damaging. At the inquest, a striking fact came to light. The barrister representing Jay's family told the court that Brandon Hodgson, one of Jay's closest friends on the trip, was unwilling to give evidence. Just let that sink in. Brandon wasn't just some distant acquaintance. He was with Jay in Tenerife. He was present at the NRG festival. He received a direct phone call from Jay during the crucial window of time on the morning of June the 17th. A call that, according to his own words to Spanish police, included Jay laughing and joking and acting out of his mind. Yet despite this, Brandon failed to cooperate with the British inquest. Lancashire police attempted to serve a legal summons to his home address multiple times. Calls were made, voicemails were left. Nothing. Even his mother, Natalie Hodgson, was hand-delivered a letter from the coroner, a process recorded on body-worn footage. And still, no contact was made by either Brandon or his mother. He remained entirely absent from proceedings. He was believed to be in Tenerife at the time of the inquest. This isn't just avoidance, this is active refusal. And it raises a fundamental question. Why? What could possibly justify refusing to give evidence when your friend has died under such mysterious circumstances? If Hodgson's refusal to testify was troubling, the disappearance of Stephen Roccas is even more damning. Roccas was one of the last people known to have seen Jay alive. He was present at the Airbnb in Masca, alongside Ayub Qasim. According to Qasim, the three of them stayed up late, and Jay left in the morning, apparently voluntarily. But Roccas never gave a formal statement to Spanish police. He didn't appear at the inquest. He didn't return calls. He didn't respond to emails. He was simply gone. What the inquest revealed is that the coroner's office had spoken to Roccas prior to the first hearing and explained the need for a statement. An email was arranged. After that point, he completely vanished. UK police made repeated efforts to locate him, including visits to 2 known addresses in London, a business address, and multiple checks of national databases. They even discovered that Roccas had appeared at East London Magistrates Court in April and was due to sign on at Stratford Police Station shortly after. He failed to do so. By the time of the first inquest, Roccas was considered unreachable. Lancashire police had led the search, but ultimately it yielded nothing. He had slipped through the cracks, or perhaps chose to fall through them. This isn't a case of background characters missing from the narrative. These are 2 of the last people to interact with Jay Slater, one by phone, the other in person. Brandon Hodgson's testimony could have clarified what Jay sounded like during that final call, whether he was scared, disoriented, or under pressure, and it could have clarified what was said, and in what order, across that confusing 8:30 a.m. window. Stephen Roccas' account could have answered what happened in the Airbnb that morning, whether Jay left alone or under stress, and what state he was in, physically, mentally, or emotionally. Their silence deprived the court and the public of vital information, and without them, the coroner was left relying solely on Qasim's account, an account that many still view with suspicion due to its evasiveness and internal contradictions. Dr. James Adley acknowledged that both witnesses were absent, yet the inquest proceeded. The verdict? Accidental death. No third-party involvement. But how can any verdict be truly sound when 2 key individuals, the very people who could confirm or contradict the narrative, are nowhere to be found? How do we reconcile that with justice? Well, we can't. Brandon Hodgson didn't just ignore a summons. He ignored his friend's story. Stephen Roccas didn't just vanish. He erased a chapter from the investigation. Their silence echoes louder than many of the testimonies heard in court. And in that silence lies a question that this episode cannot and will not ignore. What are they not telling us? Because until every voice is heard, and every witness is willing to speak, the full truth of Jay Slater's final hours will remain just out of reach, obscured not by the mountainous terrain, but by the people who turned their backs when it mattered most. If the purpose of an inquest is to bring clarity, then the inquest into the death of Jay Slater left us with more questions than answers. Because when you examine the facts presented, and just as crucially, the facts ignored, what becomes clear is this. The story we're being given doesn't hold together. The seams are exposed, and the threads are fraying. This isn't about guesswork. This chapter doesn't drift into speculation. It's an interrogation of the record itself, of the contradictions the court never resolved, the missing evidence that was never chased, and the decisions that were never truly explained. Let's begin with the calls. According to the timeline, Jay had a video call with Brad Hargreaves at 7:30 a.m. During that call, Jay is seen walking through rocky terrain outside, not lounging in the Airbnb, not chatting by the front door. He was moving. He was out there. But Ayub Qasim, the man Jay spent the night with, told the inquest that Jay was still inside the apartment as late as 8 a.m., that he was talking about buses, that he refused a lift, that he walked away calmly. So what's the truth? Was Jay already in the mountains before 7:30 a.m., as the video suggests? Or was he indoors until after 8, as Kasim insists? No one at the inquest tried to reconcile that timeline. Two realities, side by side, and the court chose to leave them both hanging. Then there's the unexplained call. Brad Hargreaves told the inquest that Jay abruptly ended their video chat because he had another call coming in. But Lucy Law, the person widely reported as Jay's last contact, didn't call him until 8:30 a.m. So who called him between 7:30 and 8:30? Well, this wasn't explored. There was no pressure testing of that hour. And yet, that missing call might be the single most important gap in this timeline. Because if someone else reached Jay in that window, we need to know who and why. Now ask yourself, why did Jay leave that Airbnb at all? He had no charger, no water, no money, no map. He was stranded in a remote village he didn't know, under a rising sun that would push the temperature well above safe limits. Every logical part of his brain should have screamed, "Stay put." Kasim said Jay was impatient, that he didn't want to wait for a lift, that he walked off of his own accord. But that doesn't track. Jay was many things, but he wasn't suicidal. Even if, as toxicology indicated, he had substances in his system, he was coherent enough to check bus times, make phone calls, and attempt to explain his location. This wasn't a stumble into the unknown. It was a decision, and decisions are made for reasons. Which brings us back to the line that no one can shake. I can't go back. Those were Jay's exact words to Lucy Law during their final conversation. Not "I'm lost," not "I don't know the way." He said he couldn't go back. There's weight in that phrasing. Not won't, can't. What happened in that Airbnb? What dynamic shifted? Did something scare him? Was he threatened? Was there a reason he believed returning was not an option? That single sentence should have triggered a deeper probe, but instead, it was skimmed past like background noise. A vital clue discarded. Then there's the now infamous knife photo. The inquest waved it away as just banter, social media bravado, a joke. But Jay sent that image before he arrived at the Airbnb, which raises an uncomfortable question. Why did he feel the need to post that message at all? Was he just messing about, or was there tension brewing beneath the surface that he didn't want to say out loud? And finally, we come to the absences. Brandon Hodgson and Stephen Roccas. For all the doubt and contradiction that surrounds the Jay Slater case, there's one thing that becomes clear. Not everything about this investigation was flawed. There are some pillars of truth, hard, verifiable, and unshakable, that must be acknowledged. Because if we ignore the facts, we lose the foundation. Let's begin with the terrain. Masca isn't a village in the traditional sense. It's a collection of steep, isolated dwellings carved into mountains that break into cliffs and ravines without warning. This was no place for a 19-year-old to wander aimlessly, especially without food, water, or understanding of the route. What's clear from both the local authorities and independent hikers is this. Park Rural de Tenno is unforgiving. There's no signs, no stable paths, no quick way back. Even seasoned explorers have called it treacherous. Jay wasn't lost in a park. He was stranded in a natural labyrinth, the kind you don't just walk out of. That much the inquest acknowledged clearly. Then came the digital trail. Say what you will about the narrative gaps, but Jay's phone data was undeniable. His iPhone GPS pinged repeatedly between 7:59 and 8:49 a.m., showing movement, elevation gain, and a pattern consistent with someone climbing and walking. At 8:51 a.m., Jay's phone emitted one final location ping, near the area where his body would be found almost a month later. There's no evidence that data was tampered with, no gaps in the tracking. That ping didn't lie. Jay was in that area. Now the autopsy. Jay Slater's body was badly decomposed, but the forensic evidence was still strong enough to reach a conclusion. He suffered major blunt force injuries, including a fracture to his skull. The coroner confirmed they were consistent with the fall from height into a rocky terrain. There were no stab wounds, no gunshots, no signs of restraint or trauma that couldn't be explained by the fall. The toxicology showed the presence of cannabis and cocaine, enough to suggest recent use, but not enough to cause collapse or psychosis. No sedatives, no signs of poisoning. The cause of death was physical, not chemical. And when it came to the search, the part most criticized by the public, the inquest made one thing clear. This wasn't a case of laziness. Spanish search teams covered miles of dangerous ground. They used drones, dogs, helicopters, even military-trained mountain rescuers. And still, Jay's body lay hidden down a steep ravine, concealed by dense scrub, invisible from above. Dr. James Adley didn't play to the gallery. He acknowledged the theories, the speculation, and the online noise. But he stayed inside the guardrails of evidence. He made it clear, perception is not proof, suspicion is not substance. You can disagree with the scope of his conclusions, but not the method. He ruled based on physical facts, and in that regard, he did his job. When a coroner delivers a verdict, the official record is closed. But that doesn't mean the questions disappear. And in Jay Slater's case, they've only grown louder. Because while the inquest gave us a cause of death, a fall in dangerous terrain, it didn't settle the debate. Instead, it split the story in two: what was decided in court, and what the rest of the world still believes. So now we're left with a split narrative. One side says, Jay wandered into danger, no foul play, just a tragic mistake. The other says, not so fast. There were signs, warnings, patterns, and people who still haven't told the whole truth. Let's be clear, the inquest did not prove the theories wrong. It simply chose not to pursue them. And for many people, for the family, for friends, and for anyone who believes in justice, that will never be enough. Beneath the speculations, the contradictions, and the digital breadcrumbs lies something far more human: a mother's loss. When all the theories are set aside, what remains is a devastating truth. Debbie Duncan and Warren Slater lost their son. And in the closing stages of the inquest, she reminded the world of that in a way no one else could. Debbie's statement was not just a tribute. It was an emotional anchor in a case that had too often spiraled into chaos and conjecture. She described Jay not as a headline, not as a case file, but as a son. A bright, cheeky, kind young man. Someone full of promise. Someone who lit up every room he walked into. Someone who was more than the reckless image some corners of the internet tried to make him out to be. She spoke of his love for football, holidays, and the way he cared for his siblings. She acknowledged the decisions that led him to that remote ravine, but she refused to let those final moments define who he was. She said, Jay was so much more than the headlines. He was our boy. Those words silenced the courtroom. In a case defined by noise, her voice cut through everything. She also reflected on the unbearable 29-day search, the sleepless nights, the waiting, the false hope, the media glare, and she thanked those who helped, the authorities, the volunteers, the strangers who cared enough to spread the word. But Debbie didn't hold back her frustration either. She voiced what so many had thought, that people had lied, that vital truths had been withheld, and that some of the individuals closest to Jay in his final hours had given very little back. Her grief wasn't just about what happened. It was about what wasn't said, what wasn't done. And in her final appeal to the public, Debbie didn't demand justice. She asked for compassion. She asked people to stop the online cruelty, the wild accusations, the mockery, the heartless speculation. Because behind every theory is a real family, still grieving. Debbie Duncan stood not just as a mother in mourning, but as a symbol of strength, decency, and dignity. Her words were not about blame, they were about memory. The inquest into Jay Slater's death has now concluded. An official verdict has been delivered. But for many, for his family, for his friends, and for the thousands who have followed the story from the beginning, something still doesn't sit right. And perhaps that's because the truth doesn't always live inside a courtroom. Perhaps it lives in the questions left behind, the ones too uncomfortable to ask, the ones that never made it into evidence. Jay Slater's death was ruled an accident. And maybe, physically, that is exactly what happened. Maybe he did fall. Maybe it was no one's fault. Maybe nature was simply unforgiving that morning. But that's not the same as saying we know the whole truth, because we still don't know why he left that Airbnb in the first place. We still don't understand the gap in his phone data. We still don't know why people close to him didn't attend the inquest. We still don't know what role fear played in his final decisions. And we still don't know why the most basic questions, the human ones, were never properly answered. This case, in spirit, if not in law, still feels like an open verdict. It's a reflection of the world we live in now. A world where public interest cases play out in real time. Where theories develop online before police statements are even released. That reality brings pressure, but it also brings accountability. Because without public scrutiny, how many of these contradictions would have gone unchallenged? The Jay Slater case proves one thing with certainty. People no longer accept surface-level conclusions. They want to understand. And that, when done respectfully, is not disrespect. It's a pursuit of truth. This series has never been about assigning guilt. It has never been about stoking conspiracy. It has been about asking questions, calmly, forensically, and compassionately. That's how we honor the truth. And more importantly, that's how we honor Jay. But truth-seeking must walk hand in hand with empathy. With every contradiction we investigate, we must also carry care. With every timeline we analyze, we must respect the pain that timeline caused. Debbie Duncan and Warren Slater have endured what no parents ever should. If we take anything from their strength, let it be this. Seek truth without cruelty. Ask questions without forgetting the people behind them. Because Jay Slater was not a case number. He was a teenager with dreams, with flaws, with people who loved him fiercely. This series is coming to an end, but this story does not. If more can be learned, it should be. If someone knows something, they should come forward. And if this truly was nothing more than a tragic accident, then we must one day find peace in that. But not until every silence has been heard. Not until every unanswered question has been met with the dignity it deserves. Jay's story will stay with us, not because of how it ended, but because of everything that still doesn't make sense. And somewhere, in all that silence, truth may still be waiting to speak. There are gaps they never closed, not because they couldn't, but because they chose not to. Whether it was oversight, indifference, or something more deliberate, the inquest left too many questions hanging in the air. And in doing that, it left the public searching for answers that should have been delivered in that courtroom. But we're not done. In our next and final episode, we'll take a step back. We'll revisit all of the major theories we've explored so far, from the possibility of foul play, to the timeline inconsistencies, to the questions around drugs, fear, and flight, and will weigh each one of them on a balance of probability. Which version of events holds the most weight? Which ones fall apart under scrutiny? And which theory, if any, brings us closest to the truth? If you've followed this case from the start, or if you've only just joined us, this next chapter is essential. Because it's not just about speculation, it's about logic, evidence, and the search for the most plausible truth. So subscribe if you haven't already. Like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. But as always, keep them respectful.